You're listening to Panthers on Tap. I'm Curtis Rauen, joined by Bryson Karbley. We're just two fans sharing our love for the game in Carolina Panthers football. So join us, crack open a cold one, some bubbly, a little wine, some scotch. We don't care, whatever makes you sleep better at night. Before we dive into the episode, a little self-promotion. Stop what you're doing. Go give us a follow on Twitter at Panthers on Tap. Join the discussion on our Facebook group. We have over 2,500 members. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcast. Just search Panthers on Tap. We are joining you guys here on a Tuesday night as the coaching carousel has really picked up over the last couple days. Two teams over really the last 2 days have hired head coaches. We have the Titans hiring Brian Callahan, a guy who was supposed to interview in Carolina the following day. And then tonight, the big breaking news coming out that the Chargers, which I feel like a lot of people expected, are going to hire the man in Michigan, Jim Harbaugh. So, Bryson, I just wanted to get your quick reaction to that. I know he was high up on your list as well as mine, but just thoughts on Harbaugh now going to L.A.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a spectacular hire for the Chargers. You know, a team that's kind of underachieved for the past, however long Justin Herbert's been there. I think that, well, I mean, you could even go back to Philip Rivers' days. You know, Philip Rivers being a top 10 passing yards leader of all time and not going to a Super Bowl is, I think, pretty underachieving. And then you bring in a guy like Harbaugh, who has been a proven winner. You know, we've talked about it time and time again on this podcast, who's been a proven winner everywhere he's been. To pair him with a quarterback like Herbert in a roster like the Chargers, who have a talented roster from top to bottom, I think that it's a match made in heaven for both of them. I think they're a perfect fit. I think he'll continue to build on that roster that they have and coach them up and get the Chargers back to their winning ways. I mean, that division has some outstanding coaches in it right now. With Andy Reid, Jim Harbaugh, Sean Payton. That's a tough division for sure. So I really like the hire. Obviously, I wish Carolina was in contention to get him. I think that he would have been perfect here as far as a culture setter and team builder. But it seems like they weren't interested, dating back to last year when he had reached out to Tepper apparently, and Tepper didn't display any interest at that point. So, I think it's going to be successful for the Chargers. I really do. I think the Chargers are going to be in contention. Maybe not this year. It might take a year or two to kind of get things rolling. But once Harbaugh settles in there and kind of gets things set to the way he wants, I think the Chargers are going to be a team to be reckoned with in the AFC.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely got a big fish for sure. I think Harbaugh is just a proven winner wherever he goes. 3 NFC championships and then a Super Bowl appearance with San Francisco, and then he goes to Michigan, finally wins the national championship. They're getting a good one. Congrats to Herbert. I'm happy it's not in Atlanta because he was interviewing there. He had potentially a second interview tomorrow set. So, LA was not allowing him to leave, and they get a big one. Let's transition now. Let's focus on the Panthers here. Since we last talked, they've obviously hired a general manager. The official title is President of Football Operations and General Manager, Mr. Dan Morgan. I know we've talked about him a little bit on this show, but I know I wasn't too happy about this decision. Where is your head at with Morgan?
Yeah, I tweeted about it. I am a huge Dan Morgan fan from his time in Carolina. As a linebacker, as a player who has the team record for most tackles in the Super Bowl, who has been a leader, who was around this team when it was winning and when it was losing. I have his jersey hanging in my closet. I wear it frequently to different games. I really want this hire to work out, but I think that when you take into consideration the Carolina Panthers are coming off one of the worst seasons in the history of its existence, one of the most, I would say, the most disappointing season in the history of its existence. It could be argued it was the worst. And you hire from down the hall within the building and promote the assistant GM, who was said to have had a great relationship with the previous GM, quote unquote, best friends with Scott Fitterer. I can understand the frustrations that you have, that I have, that other fans have, and questions that we have. What kind of decisions did Dan Morgan make? What kind of say did he have on different mistakes that Scott Fitterer had? These are questions that we may never have answered, and I would like to say or hope that Dan Morgan has proven that a lot of these decisions that Scott Fitterer made, he was against. I don't think that necessarily that's the case, because I don't trust David Tepper as far as I can throw him. So I think David Tepper, what it looks like from, the outside looking in is David Tepper went with someone he was comfortable with. You see these things like Al Wallace, a former teammate of Dan Morgan's, who says Dan Morgan has the personality to push Tepper away and say no. I hope that's the case. Time will tell with that. And with the title of president of football operations, it seems like they're kind of trying to separate Tepper from the football operation side of it, and kind of put Morgan as the middleman there. But Tepper can do what Tepper wants. It doesn't matter what a title is. Tepper can step into the building and demand anything. And I think hopefully Morgan can do that arm's length away and push him and push back when Tepper tries to intervene in football operations, roster decisions, trades, anything, because it's proven to not work. And then, you have reports like Adam Schefter saying that he doesn't think Tepper's a meddling owner. I don't know how much of a mouthpiece Schefter is for the league. Obviously, he's, well connected, and of course wants to promote a good image for the NFL. But and I'm sure owners have a say in what's reported and what's not for reporters like that. So, it was frustrating to see it, because I felt like we needed a wholesale change in Carolina to wipe the stench of last season off. And I was encouraged to see that they're moving on from guys like Samir Solomon, but the scouting department which is, I think, is the most egregious part of this. The scouting department was just basically shifted. Like, they kept most of their scouts, and these are the scouts that rated DJ Johnson high enough to trade up in the third round and select DJ Johnson. So, I think the scouts have proven for the last 3-4 years that they have not done a good job scouting. And I guess it's hard to tell, or hard to say for us, because we're not in that room. Maybe the scouts had Nick Herbig over DJ Johnson, and Scott Fitterer made the decision. I find that hard to believe. I'd never really felt Scott Fitterer was it's my way or the highway guy. I always felt like he was a collaborative guy that took an approach of we're going to go with what's the consensus, and not I like DJ Johnson, we're trading for DJ Johnson. I never felt that way about Scott Fitterer, and I don't think he's that kind of person. I think he's got respect around the league of being a collaborative guy. So, of course, they can say what they want at this point to make the hire look good. I really, really hope it works out. I really do. I tweeted a picture with Dan Morgan, a couple seasons ago at a Thursday night football game. He is the same as Scott Fitterer in regards to the approach he has with fans. He is very collaborative, I guess you could say, on the sideline with fans. He'll take pictures. He'll talk to you. Super personable guy. From all accounts, he's very smart. I think Greg Olson was talking about how witty and cunning and just has his wits about him that Dan Morgan does. But yeah, obviously time will tell. Like I said, I really do hope it works, because I think Dan Morgan – well, let me put it this way. I don't think any other candidate that interviewed or would have interviewed for the GM position wants to see Carolina succeed more than Dan Morgan wants to see Carolina succeed. Dan Morgan has a connection with the Carolina Panthers that was deeper than any other candidate had. Dan Morgan knows the roster better than any other candidate did. So maybe that's what swayed David Tepper into selecting him. Maybe Dan Morgan being a yes man is what swayed David Tepper, or maybe they just hired the best candidate. Time will tell. I really hope it works out, but it was a frustrating hire, to say the least, based off of coming off the worst season in existence for the Carolina Panthers and hiring from within. So I understand the fans' frustrations, but yeah, the short answer to your question, I went on a bit of a tangent. The short answer to your question is, yeah, it was frustrating. It really was. I was upset when I saw it, and I really hope it works out. But like I've said 100 times, time will tell.
Yeah, I appreciate your answer. I'm definitely disappointed. I think um, I was hoping it was going to be a clean sweep, a fresh start across the board.
Yeah,
And Tepper, time and time again, continues to keep remnants from the previous regime. And for a team, like you said, worst record in franchise history, 2-15 with the extended regular season now.
yeah,
And for a guy to get promoted in the worst season ever it's baffling. It's insane to me. I'm not going to be naive and say I know everything that Dan Morgan had in his hands within this front office, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see where he was attached at the hip every single time you saw Scott Fitter on the field. He was in the draft press conferences last year. I've rewatched those back, trying to pull some stuff from there, just of what Dan had said. I know Scott at one point, and I couldn't find the clip. I think he said that Dan was a sounding board for him, and so do I know how much he was involved? No, but he was still in that front office, and those decisions were made when he was in that front office, and there were some really bad decisions made. And Dan was one of the first guys that Scott brought in. He was hired months after Scott was brought in as GM. And you talk about it, and I agree with you when you were talking about Scott Fitter saying, I don't think he ever really put his foot down and said, yeah, this is who we're going with, no matter whoever everyone else likes. Scott, in his introductory article on Panthers.com, he was the quote unquote consensus builder. So that was his superpower, per se, in his relationship. So you got to believe that Dan Morgan had some input on some of these decisions. The DJ Johnson trade up is one of the worst moves the Panthers have made in the draft, and
egregious.
there's many of them. The free agent hires, Miles Sanders, awful decision. Hayden Hurst didn't do a damn thing. You could really say Von Bell didn't have much of an impact. And then for a front office to say, and Scott is the head of that, but to come in and say that this offensive line was ready to protect Bryce Young, that was a big mistake. So there's a lot of things that the Panthers front office missed on just this last year alone. And for a guy who was involved in that, while we don't know how much of his involvement, I just didn't want to have to deal with that. I don't want to be guessing on what Dan did in this awful season. And I just wanted a clean slate across the board. Now, I'm not saying, I hope he proves me wrong. I'm not discounting that. I mean, I hope he does great things and turns this entire franchise around, but it's hard to side with a decision like that when it was arguably the worst season for the Carolina Panthers. And I mean, there's been some really fucking bad ones. So it's and it sucks because I wanted to put this out there too. And you mentioned it. Dan is a really good guy. He is a good dude. I've met him a couple times and I've talked to him briefly. I've talked to him last year. I want to say it was before the Atlanta game, and I asked him where his head was at, and if they're going to go out and get a quarterback. You guys can go check our Twitter account on that. And he was very down to earth, gave me a straight up answer. Cool dude, took a picture with us. And honestly, this last game, and I wish I would have asked Dan more at the last game of the season versus Tampa Bay. I went up and I hollered for him to come over, and we dabbed it up and whatever, and that's all. I just said hi to him and that was it. I wish I would have pursued more on that, but like, he is a good dude, and it sounds like Greg Olson talked highly of him. I understand that he was a hell of a football player. I will never forget him playing on the field in Carolina. He made some damn good hits back in the day. But I was really hoping for a fresh start for this regime across the board. I'm glad they took the steps with Samir Suleiman. I will say I think there was some contracts, and I know people are going to harp on it, but I feel like Carolina was, looking back at the past, was in a better position cap-wise than they have been in the last decade or so. And we can go back to all the bad contracts Gettleman gave out and Marnie Hurney over the years. So I do want to give Samir some credit there, but clearly they want to bring in a different cap guy. And the way this is constructed, it sounds kind of where the sportsology is coming in, that they are following San Francisco's method of thinking of, Dan Morgan gets the title of president of football operations, general manager. They're going to hire a cap guy alongside him. They did that very similar in San Francisco with John Lynch. They hired a cap guy alongside him. So they're trying to follow that. But Bryson, it just begs the question how much sportsology had in this interview process when you don't go out and hire a firm to go and hire the guy that was already in the building. Like that, the shit doesn't add up to me at all. So that's a whole nother question in this entire process. If you just hired them to give you the format of how you wanted your front office structure, okay, so be it. Then come out and say that. But that one doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me whatsoever. So I don't want to be down in the dumps and everything, but I don't have a lot of faith right now in any decision Tepper makes, and I'll be reluctant no matter what happens until they start winning, because I'm not going to jump the gun like I did last year. And here we are talking about the worst season ever for Carolina. So I don't know. I'm not going to feel bad, and I hope you don't feel bad. I hope no other fan feels bad, because I'm sick of seeing it online where people are like, "Why are Panther fans so depressed?" They have been shit for every single year under David Tepper. There is nothing good that has happened in this organization. Fans should be pissed off, and it's justified across the board. So I'm tired of seeing that shit online where fans, they're getting pissed at people for complaining. I mean, what do you want us to do? You can't be complacent with the dog shit that has been brought to this franchise by David Tepper. It's shit across the board.
Yeah. So, and I think that's that frustration is understandable. I think that Panthers fans have the right to be frustrated because of what you mentioned, and what I stated earlier. The worst season, the most disappointing season in Panthers history. You had the number 1 overall pick. Scott Fitterer was saying, drop a quarterback in and we're competing for a playoff spot for the NFC South division. And then we're the worst team in the NFL. Like, when I don't remember the expectations being so high and then delivering nothing. And it's frustrating. And I think both of us can agree that we want it to work out. We really hope that it does. We're not saying that Dan Morgan's the wrong decision because we don't think he's the right guy. Maybe it's just because, and maybe he's just not getting a fair shake, Dan Morgan, because of the frustrations that we had with Scott Fitterer and his relation to Scott Fitterer. And maybe in Carolina, he's starting kind of on, if you're giving him 3 strikes, he's starting on strike 2 instead of starting on strike 0 because of his relationship with Scott Fitterer. And I think that might not be fair to him, but as Panther fans, we don't really have anything else to go off of besides what we've seen. And he was here in the building for last season. He was here, since 2021. And since David Tepper's taken over the team, the Carolina Panthers have the worst record in the NFL since David Tepper's been the owner. So,
and don't tell me not to be skeptical. I'm not saying you, but other people out there, don't tell me not to be skeptical when David Tepper has never given us a reason to think otherwise, because he hasn't. He has struck out on every single decision he's made for this franchise, every single one of them.
Yep.
So, but let's talk about that front office a little bit, that alignment, because Jonathan Jones, and this has been reported by Joe Person too, that they're not done in the front office. JJ said it's possible Tepper isn't done, adding to this front office. I know Person has talked about with the Athletic, Brant Tillis. I don't know a whole lot about him. I read some article that he was pretty pivotal in the Patrick Mahomes mega deal that he got, the 10-year deal up to $500 million, but it sounded like it was actually a pretty cap friendly deal for the team over time, allow them to make other moves. So again, I don't know. I'm not going to sit up here and tell you that I know a ton about this guy, because I don't. That's where their thinking is. They obviously got rid of Samir, and they can't make that hire until, I want to say, I don't think they can put anything into place until after this week, it sounds like, for any of that. So that might not be finalized, and that's probably why we're waiting. But that's clearly the direction this front office is headed. Let's get into head coaches now for a second, because that is slowly, I think it's just a slow process. The way the things are set up with the NFL this year, teams right now that are in the championship games, they cannot interview in person until next week on the 27th, I think it is, 26th or 27th, whenever Monday is. And then this week on the 22nd started in-person interviews, but all those teams that are in the championships are excluded from that. So it's kind of if you want your prized possession, like David Tepper wants probably Ben Johnson, he's going to have to wait to interview him until next week. So the guys they have interviewed so far in this second round has been Ejiro Evero, Dave Canales, and Raheem Morris. Bryson, I got to give you props, because you broke some news this week, and I'll let you take it away in a second, but it really started kind of just a path across a lot of the, people that we look up to as beat reporters, and it just kind of took off from there. But take it away, because you deserve a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, and it wasn't me, it was my source. And of course, I'm not going to give my source away, but I reached out to this person who I trust, that has connections around the NFL, and just wanted to know if that person was willing to give me any information that person may know about the Carolina Panthers situation. And, that person told me that Dave Canales was a serious contender and the potential front runner currently for the Carolina Panthers job. This was before any of the reports came out from Scheffner, or even, people like Joe Person, that Dave Canales was coming back for a second interview or anything like that. So he had told me that, and then the person also told me that Dan Quinn was in contention for the job, which it hasn't been reported for a second interview. I think the contention part of that is the aspect of Dan Quinn's relationship with Dan Morgan in their time in Seattle. And I could see that. I could draw the connection there. But yeah, I think Dave Canales, I think he is probably the front runner currently for the job. I don't think that that's really any surprise for anyone that's paid attention on Twitter. But there are other interviewers. Obviously, you mentioned Ejiro Evero and Raheem Morris, and then today we heard that Mike Vrabel has an interview tomorrow in Charlotte. So I think they're still searching. My source also told me that Ben Johnson to Washington was essentially a done deal at this point, and that he didn't think that Carolina really had a chance in getting Ben Johnson at this point, based off of the connections with Ben Johnson to the Commanders. And then, of course, you can draw the connection. They have a current UNC quarterback on the roster in Sam Howell. The Commanders are going to be in position to draft Drake May, UNC quarterback. They have much more cap space. They have a better GM and a better owner than the Carolina Panthers. So the only thing that could potentially draw Ben Johnson to Carolina is Bryce Young, if he has belief in Bryce Young, which I think every coach should have belief in Bryce Young, because I think Bryce Young is a good quarterback. And the draw of him returning home and bringing his home team back to prominence. You don't know how much weight that has with a candidate. Personally, for me, it would have a lot of weight, but I understand taking the best job for your career. And I don't think Carolina really has shown, or David Tepper specifically has shown, that he has patience and or is easy to work with for any candidate that's potentially interviewing for head coach. So, in my opinion, with the things I've heard, Dave Canales is still a favorite, even after reports from today of other interviewers. Um, I think that it's essentially his job to lose at this point, unless Vrabel comes in tomorrow and wows everyone. And there's been reports about Vrabel that came out.
Let's hold on Vrabel, though. I want to talk about Dave for a second. What do you think of Dave?
Yeah.
Are you a fan of the hire? What is your thoughts of him coming in here?
Yeah, I do like Dave Canales a lot. I think that his work with quarterbacks speaks for itself. He has helped Geno Smith return to prominence. Obviously, we saw what he did with Baker this year. Russell Wilson had a good year under his tutelage as a quarterbacks coach. There is some questions about the talent that he's had to work with, especially at the wide receiver position for this time in Seattle and then his time with the Bucs. There is a question about the scheme that he runs and the lack of motion. I know that you have some questions about that, so I'll let you get into that a little bit more. But I think that the biggest thing that I like about Canales is that he is not set on any type of offensive scheme that he is where it's my way or the highway. He is one of the most open-minded coaches in the league. He adapts on the fly. If the run's working, he's running. If the run's not working, he's not running. He's passing. If the pass isn't working, he's trying something else that we haven't even thought of. So I do like that aspect of his flexibility as a coach. If he were the hire in Carolina, I would want him to be the play caller. I think I saw something that I think it was Scheffner that reported, every team in the NFL has lost an offensive coordinator within the past 3 or 4 years. So what I would want is consistency for Bryce Young. And if your head coach is calling plays, then you're not going to lose your head coach, hopefully, if he's doing well. And that would bring that consistency of a play caller to, your rookie quarterback that you invested a lot in. So Canales, I think, could bring that. He called plays for the Bucs. Well, the Bucs won a playoff game and overachieved this year, I think. And we can all say that Baker played well. And Baker looked rejuvenated, his best year since his rookie year with the Browns. So I think Canales has his pros and it has his cons. I think a lot of people would probably say he's a year away from a head coaching hire that most would think of. But I think if he's your guy and you are confident in that and you have conviction, like in that video with when they traded up for DJ Johnson, it's unfortunate that that's the scenario that you got to use. But if you have conviction, then you got to go get your guy. And if the opinion around the league is that he needs one more year, but you're high on him, then strike while the iron is hot and go get your guy. So I think Canales definitely is my top candidate of the people that have interviewed twice. I'll say that.
Yeah. So positives that I've taken away just from listening to his, press conferences and some people that I trust around the league, it sounds like he's a pretty good leader and he's a really good communicator. And that's, I think this past year was not great within the locker room. It sounded like with Frank Reich, like there was just the messaging was all over the place. Too many people in Bryce's ear. Hayden Hurst confirmed that after the season. So I think that is a plus, and I think that is what's needed in this next candidate. You talked about it. He was a QB coach with Geno Smith. He wasn't calling plays there. It was Shane Waldron. But I'm sure he had influence on Geno Smith. And then he comes here and, Baker Mayfield takes off this year. It's so hard to tell how much his influence was on Baker and if it was the talent around Baker that got him better. Because, coming from Carolina and then a banged up LA last year with the Rams and then come to, Tampa Bay and you got a plethora of weapons. I'm sure that aided. And I mentioned this on Twitter. You talked about it just briefly. The motion concepts in his offense playbook scares me, but I don't think that's like you said, he might be able to adapt. And it sounded like Seattle did a lot of motion with Shane Waldron. So I think he might just fit that within his QB, but I really hope Carolina doesn't go with a stagnant, style of offense at the line of scrimmage to start plays, because we saw what happened with Frank. Carolina was what? The chart that I posted, it was Carolina was 26th or 27th in motion on offense, and Tampa Bay was 29. So even worse than Carolina. And we all bitched about it this whole season, how they didn't use motion. So I hope that he makes that, if he were the coach, he adapts to that. The other thing, and Josh Norris was really the one that put me onto this. So while the Bucks were 12th in EPA per play, they were 27th in success rate this year offensively, and they were 30th in early down success. So on first and second down, they were 30th in the league in their success rate, and they were dead last in the run game. And they got, that white guy is pretty damn good over there. I mean, he's a good runner. So for them to be 30th, that concerns me a little bit. So those are probably the biggest knocks on him. And hats off to Norris with Underground Fantasy. If you guys don't follow him on Twitter, he is a must follow for Panthers fans. Really good dude. His stuff with Josh McCown, that he's doing stuff with Colt McCoy now. Give him a follow. He's worth it. But those are just some of my concerns. And I don't think Carolina has to rush with Canales. I don't think they got to rush this. No one else has interviewed him. So there's not real much pressure besides maybe Tampa Bay trying to retain him, that they got to go out and rush this. And that's what kind of concerned me today. Because based off of what you were reporting and based off of what others were confirming of your reporting, I was like, holy shit, this could happen today. Like it would not shock me at all, because that's the type of guy David Tepper is. Like, yeah. If he finds the guy he wants, he's going to take it right away. He ain't going to mess around. And we saw that with Matt Rule. So that's why I'm like, let's just pump the brakes. I hope they go out, because I think there's other guys out. I think I'm still not out on Ben Johnson to Washington. I know those reports are out there. There has been 2 reports, and I think one was Pelissero and one was, I don't know what the other one, but I watched the video, and Pelissero says, well, everyone thinks that Washington is locked in 100%. That is not a done deal yet. So I would hold off. I'm holding out hope. I'm stubborn as hell. I know that. And I just want Ben Johnson. But I think there's other candidates out there that I would prefer over Canales. But that's just kind of where I'm at on him. We talked about Morris last week, and we can kind of get into the next interview that came out tonight. And it's really the big fish interview Carolina is doing in this cycle. And that's Mike Vrabel. And I will say this, Bryson, I prefer a new first-time head coach. That is my preference. However, if there was any retread in this cycle besides Harbaugh, it would be Mike Vrabel for me. The guy is and preaches being a tough football team across the board. Hard as hell on defense, punch you in the mouth in the run game, and he's really never had a good QB on his team. Like Ryan Tannehill, middle of the road. So having and thinking about the pairing of him with Bryce Young excites me. And I would prefer a new young head coach, but it's so hard to not even you gotta go out and interview some of these guys. You had some of the biggest pillars in football come out of this coaching cycle, and not to interview any of them would have been insanity for David Tepper.
Yeah.
So I think it's smart as hell. Bring him in. Let's see what he's got. What's his plan for Bryce Young? What's his plan with this defense? I bet your ass he ain't letting Brian Burns go, and I love every bit of that. So he ain't gonna let a guy like that go on his defense. But no, his teams now, he has had back-to-back losing seasons. I get it, and I get there's people don't want the retread route because we already went through that disaster this past. I get that totally. but this guy, you talk to majority of people, and everyone was blindsided by the firing, like across the board. So I don't know. I totally think Vrabel, it would be a splash hire. He would bring respect back to this team, and I think he could pull in some guys that, in his time in Tennessee and get this team winning again. So I am all for them bringing him in. But yeah, I'll stop there. I'll let you go.
Yeah, so I agree. I think that Vrabel is a guy that would come in and be a culture setter from day one. He's a guy that's going to pick out the players in the locker room that aren't focused on winning and get them out. He is a guy that will not accept anything less than a player's best, and he is not afraid to let a player know. I think a lot of us heard the Wesley Woodward interview on a radio station in Nashville.
Did you? I didn't listen to it. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
What's the gist of it for people that haven't heard it?
Yeah, so Wesley Woodward came on to a radio station there in Nashville and talked about his time in Tennessee and with Vrabel as a head coach. He essentially said Vrabel kind of lost his way as a player's coach and became, I think his words were, power hungry in Tennessee. He made some decisions that were questionable. He said that at one point during a season that he was playing for the Titans, Vrabel stopped allowing players to bring their children in the locker room after practice or after games, and then he would bring his own children into the locker room. So he was kind of holding a double standard there, which I don't agree with that at all. And I would hope that being fired and hearing these players interview and say what they didn't like would change ways of someone. But he did go on to say that if he had to grade Vrabel's time in Tennessee as a head coach, he would grade it as an A, and that he absolutely deserves another chance as a head coach and that he could win. So he had his qualms with Vrabel. Vrabel's not an easy coach. He's not necessarily, quote unquote, a player's coach, but he is a coach that expects the best and doesn't accept anything less. And I think that that's fair to say, while he had losing seasons, his rosters weren't the most talented. And the Titans had always come away with a couple wins a year that you would never expect them to win. Vrabel sets a tone in the locker room and on the field that I think that none of these other candidates could from day one in this locker room. And I agree with you. I think that if they were to go through retread, Vrabel would be my first choice. And I think that it's likely that a coach that was fired in the same division would come with Vrabel to be his offensive coordinator, and that's Arthur Smith, who was the offensive coordinator for one of the top offenses in the league for a couple of years with Vrabel in Tennessee.
Yeah, what do you think? I was going to ask you, what do you think of Arthur Smith? Because that would probably I haven't done too much research on who his coaches would be, but that would be probably, I would think, would be the OC. Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you this. I think Arthur Smith has made some bonehead decisions in Atlanta. I mean, to not play Bijan the way he was supposed to be played. I mean, there was some very interesting decisions he made with personnel-wise. But
yeah, and I think that there are some coaches in this league that just aren't good head coaches, and I think Arthur Smith is one of those, and they're just better coordinators. He was a really good offensive coordinator. You cannot state otherwise. The numbers don't lie. He was a really good offensive coordinator. He wasn't a good head coach. So if you have a head coach like Vrabel who is going to make the personnel decisions in regards to who plays and who doesn't, that can kind of guide him into excuse me, calling plays for someone, or not calling plays, but guide him into players that he's calling plays for. I think that could help Arthur Smith a lot, and I think that that's probably where Arthur Smith will land, wherever Vrabel does. So I wouldn't be opposed to him coming to Carolina at all. I think that he still has the ability to be a really good offensive coordinator, and I think they would install an offense that's much better than what we've seen in Carolina in a while. So obviously, I would like to know Arthur Smith's opinion on Bryce Young and Arthur Smith's philosophy, of course, for Bryce Young before making a hire, but I think that he could work under Vrabel, under Vrabel's leadership, which it did work in Tennessee. So that's what got him the head coaching job in Atlanta. There were also reports. I think Diana Orsini reported that the reason Vrabel was fired was his relationship with the owner in Tennessee. And Vrabel kind of goes back to what Wesley Woodward was saying. Vrabel wanted full roster control, and the owner was not going to give him full roster control after the relationship she had with Jeff Fisher. So I think if he is still under that assumption or that want of needing full roster control, automatically, absolutely not. You move on. Vrabel's not the guy.
Yeah, I don't think Tepper goes down that route, and that's why I don't think Bill has been interviewed here, and that's why I don't think Harbaugh has been interviewed here, which you can blame Matt Rule for because he kind of ruined that, plan of action really for any coach at this point or any candidate, which really sucks because I think in certain instances that can work, aka Jim Harbaugh. So yeah, I feel like that's been squandered across the board. But I wanted to throw out this quote because, this is coming from arguably, he is the best quarterback in the league. This is Patrick Mahomes. He was on the Netflix show, the quarterback one they did, and he was talking about Vrabel. He said, the Tennessee Titans defense, man, they're one of the toughest opponents in the league. Coach Vrabel is a great coach. They have a great game plan every single week. I know people joke around about it, but it's kind of like facing the Patriots in the early 2000s. They have more wrinkles and things that you don't expect. You have to be physical and battle to the very end every single time. And that's what I like. Anytime, even if Tennessee's like they're overmatched in like these past couple of years when they just weren't, there was injuries and just they weren't playing very well. On offense, they were always still a tough freaking team, no matter where they went. It always battle you to the end, and that's the type of team you're going to get from Vrabel. And I think if you look at any of the candidates outside of probably Bill Belichick, he would be the fastest one to probably turn this team around to winning again, I think.
Yeah.
Just be based off of his experience. So again, it is a retread. I get the qualms about him and I get the stuff that's out there. And, but you got to at least bring the guy in to interview. You would be doing a disservice to the process if you don't bring some of these guys in, because I was watching Pat McAfee's show and I can't think, was it Boston Connor? I think, is he the Patriots fan?
I'm not sure.
He was salivating when he heard Vrabel got fired because he thought New England was going to hire him instantly. I've never seen the guy more happy his entire life. I'm not kidding you. It was insane. But I think he truly understands what Vrabel would do to an organization like the Patriots if he went back there. Obviously, that didn't happen. They went a different route. But I think you would be crazy not to bring this guy in. And I'm glad it's happened. And we'll see. Atlanta, he's in Atlanta right now. He's supposed to fly to Charlotte tonight. Hopefully, we should check this. We should check the flight trackers.
The flight logs.
But yeah, so we'll see. I don't know if he's going to be going to Bank of America, or if I've seen some reports that guys are maybe going to David Tepper's house for interviews. So we'll see where things land there. But I'm excited that they're at least bringing him in. They're doing a thorough process and just not jumping the gun with Canales. Because I think even if you do hire him, it is what it is. If that's your guy, that's your guy. And if that's where alignment, goes with Dan Morgan, whatever, it is what it is. But I don't think you need to rush that hire yet. So I just hope they pump the brakes, and we'll see. They still have not, it has not come out yet, but there has not been a second interview with either Bobby Slowick or Ben Johnson to this point. But I don't know if that's just, it hasn't been reported yet. So I would hang 10 on that, and we'll see how this process plays out. But I would think by the end of next week, we should know, maybe I'm wrong, but we should have some terms or something in place that, Panthers have a new head coach at this point, which will be exciting. And then we can sit and take 2 months break because they don't have a first round pick. So, and good luck predicting that second round pick because it's going to be tough. But I think that's all I got. You got anything else to add?
No, that's it. I did reach out to my source to see if I could get any information on Vrabel and his connections to Carolina and the likelihood. Haven't heard back yet, but once I do, check the Twitter. I'm sure it'll be retweeted by Panthers on Tap from not Chris Tabor. Just check it. As soon as I hear anything, I'll let you guys know.
Damn, that's a good tease. We'll leave it there. We appreciate you guys tuning in to the Panthers on Tap podcast. Go give us a follow on Twitter at Panthers on Tap for all your analysis and breaking news. Check us out on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button. Notifications. We're up there. It's Panthers on Tap. We appreciate your guys' support. And as always,